Amadidi had always dreamed of a beautiful wedding, and when she married Ya, she believed her dreams had come true. At 24, she was a soft-spoken schoolteacher, full of love and hope for the life ahead. Ya seemed kind, and his promises of a warm home and strong family made her feel safe. But from the very first day she entered her new home, something felt wrong, something cold behind the smiles. That something was Mame Surwa, Ya's mother. Everyone gathered for the welcome tea, a traditional moment where the new bride is officially welcomed by her in-laws. The air buzzed with chatter, laughter, and clinking cups. Amadidi was nervous but tried to smile. Mame Surwa, with a sharp glance and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, offered to serve the tea, a job usually given to the elders as a sign of blessing. As she approached, holding the steaming pot, her hands didn't shake. Her face didn't flinch. But as she poured, the scalding hot liquid didn't land in the cup. It splashed straight onto Amadidi's hand. A sharp cry filled the room. Guests gasped. Some stood up in shock. Amadidi's hand turned red instantly, the skin burning, the pain unbearable. Her eyes welled with tears, not just from the pain, but from the way Mame Surwa stood there, calm, unbothered. "Oh, accidents happen," she muttered, barely hiding the smirk. But in Amadidi's heart, something deeper than skin had burned. This wasn't just hot tea. This was a warning. Amadidi sat on the edge of the bed that night, her hand wrapped in a cloth, throbbing with pain. The burn was deep, but what hurt even more was the silence. Ya hadn't said a word of comfort, not even a simple "I'm sorry." He just looked at her hand, shook his head, and went to bed. No questions. No care. The next morning, Mame Surwa acted as if nothing had happened. She sipped her tea slowly and said with a shrug, "It was just a cultural accident. These things happen during traditional events." Her voice was calm, too calm. Amadidi could barely believe what she was hearing. She wanted to speak, to ask why, to scream that it wasn't an accident, but fear gripped her throat. What if no one believed her? What if Ya took his mother's side? Days passed. Her hand got worse. The skin turned a deep red, then started to peel. She tried to hide it with long sleeves at school. When students asked, she forced a smile and said she spilled tea. Every time someone asked if she was okay, her chest tightened. She wanted to tell the truth. But something inside her whispered, "Stay quiet. Don't bring shame." At home, things got colder. Ya avoided her, blaming stress and work. Mame Surwa gave her small smiles, fake ones, the kind that said, "I dare you to speak." Amadidi started to believe it really was her fault. Maybe she moved the cup. Maybe she stood too close. The shame dug deep, heavier than the pain. Weeks later, the wound started healing, but not clean. It left a dark scar across her hand, twisted and angry. Every time she looked at it, her heart ached. Not just because of how it looked, but because it reminded her of everything she didn't say. The silence she held on to, hoping it would protect her, only made her feel smaller. And for the first time, she realized something painful. The silence was hurting her more than the burn ever could. The pain in Amadidi's hand had grown worse. The burn wasn't healing the way it should. The skin was hard, patchy, and the color had changed. Even when she touched it gently, it stung like fresh fire. She knew something wasn't right. One evening after school, she finally walked into Jollof Park Hospital. She told herself it was just for a checkup, but deep down, she was looking for answers. Dr. Kwaku was the one who examined her. He was kind, gentle, and didn't rush. He carefully unwrapped the bandage around her hand, and his face changed the moment he saw the wound. He didn't speak right away. He looked at the burn closely, touched the edges, and asked quietly, "You said this was from hot oil?" Amadidi nodded, unsure of what to say. He looked at her again, eyes serious. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "This doesn't look like an oil burn. The skin is too damaged. It looks more like acid or something chemical. Are you sure someone didn't pour something else on you?" Her heart dropped. Acid? No, she remembered the sting, the way it sizzled, how it didn't feel like just heat. It felt like it was eating her skin. Suddenly, the memory came back clearer. The way Mame Surwa had handled that pot, too calm. The way she hadn't even flinched when Amma screamed. Amadidi's hands began to shake, not from fear, but from the rush of truth. Dr. Kwaka looked around the room, leaned in, and gently said, "This wasn't an accident. You don't have to tell me everything now, but someone did this to you." That moment changed something in Amadidi. The shame she'd been carrying started to lift. Her silence had been heavy, but now it felt like a fire had started in her chest. Not of fear, but of strength. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't clumsy. She had been hurt on purpose. As she left the hospital, her hands still bandaged, her steps felt stronger. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't shrinking. A tiny voice inside her, one she hadn't heard in a long time, whispered back, "It's time to fight." Amadidi sat under the mango tree behind her old family house, holding a cup of warm sabalo in her uninjured hand. The other was still healing, wrapped carefully, but the pain now lived deeper, in her chest, in her silence. She hadn't told anyone the full truth, not even her mother. But there was one person she trusted enough to say it out loud, Aunt Amma. Aunt Amma wasn't just family. She was strength. She was fire. Known in the community as a fearless women's rights advocate, she had helped countless women escape abuse, fight injustice, and rebuild their lives. Amma Didi had always admired her from afar. But now she needed her up close. When Aunt Amma arrived, she took one look at Amma Didi's hand and her eyes softened, full of concern. "Tell me everything," she said. No pressure, no judgment, just warmth. Amma Didi broke. The tears poured out as she spoke. She told her aunt about the accident, the silence, the pain, the doctor's words. She told her how Ya said nothing, how Mame Surwa's fake smiles made her feel like she was losing her mind. Aunt Amma listened without interrupting, holding her gently like she was piecing her back together. When Amma Didi finished, Aunt Amma held her hand and said calmly but firmly, "You are not alone. And this ends now." Within days, Aunt Amma had connected her with a legal aid organization and a support group of women who had survived similar abuse. They met over Zoom and in small gatherings, sharing stories, tears, and laughter. For the first time, Amma Didi didn't feel ashamed. She felt seen. She felt understood. One of the lawyers told her something that stuck deep in her heart. Justice begins with your voice. Not with police reports. Not even with courtrooms. But with the simple, brave act of saying, "This happened to me." That night, Amma Didi lay in bed and repeated the words to herself over and over, like a prayer. "Justice begins with my voice. My voice. My voice." It wasn't a roar yet. It was still small, still shaky. But it was there. And it was growing. Amma Didi never imagined she'd one day hide a camera in her own kitchen. But after everything she had lived through, after the burn, the silence, the truth whispered by Dr. Kwaku, and the strength passed to her by Aunt Amma, she knew it was time to protect herself with proof. She bought the camera quietly, using money she had saved from teaching. It was small, shaped like a charger, easy to miss. With shaking hands, she placed it behind the spice rack, facing the room where most of the tension happened. The kitchen, the heart of the house. The place Mame Surwa liked to invade, always with a sweet smile and sharp words. Days passed. The camera stayed silent. Then one Thursday afternoon, Mame Surwa showed up with a basket of plantains and smoked fish. "I brought something for you, dear," she said, smiling too wide. Amma Didi felt her stomach tighten. She thanked her politely, even as her eyes flicked to the spice rack. The camera was on. Mame Surwa walked around the kitchen like she owned it. She started picking at Amma Didi's cooking. "Why is the soup watery? You still cook like a stranger." Then she knocked a pot off the stove. "You see? Clumsy again." Amma Didi stayed calm. She said nothing, but inside, her heart was pounding. Mame Surwa moved closer, too close. Her voice dropped. "You think anyone will believe you? You're just a small girl playing wife." At that moment, Amma Didi reached behind her apron and pressed record. Everything was captured. The words, the tone, the aggression behind the fake kindness. It was all there, finally. Real. Not just in her memory, but in a video no one could ignore. When Mame Surwa left, Amma Didi sat on the kitchen stool for a long time, staring at the floor, tears slowly falling. Not from sadness, but from something like relief. She had it. The truth. Not whispered, not imagined, recorded. She sent a copy to Aunt Amma that night. Her aunt replied with a voice note. "This is it, Didi. This is the shift. You've done something powerful." And in that quiet kitchen, Amma Didi felt something inside her finally breathe. The video was never meant to go viral. Amma Didi had only shared it with Aunt Amma and the legal team. But somehow, within days, it started spreading, first on WhatsApp, then on Facebook. One person sent it to a cousin, another to a friend in a women's group, and before long, it was everywhere. The video showed everything. Mame Surwa's cruel voice, her insults, the anger in her eyes, the threat in her tone. No one watching could pretend it was just a misunderstanding. People were shocked. Comments flooded in. "This is evil. How can a mother-in-law do this? She needs to be arrested. Sister, we believe you. We stand with you." Amma Didi sat on her bed, scrolling through the flood of messages. Some were from strangers, some from old schoolmates she hadn't spoken to in years. Many were women who said, "Me too." The noise was loud, but strangely comforting. After months of silence, people were finally seeing what she had carried alone. The pain, the fear, the truth, it was all out there now, and no one could erase it. Then Ya called. He sounded shaken. "Amma, please. I didn't know it was this serious. Can we talk? I'm sorry. I'll make it right. Just please don't let this go further." For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just listened to his voice, trembling with panic, not for her pain, but for his reputation. He hadn't said sorry when she was burnt. He hadn't defended her when his mother mocked her. But now that the world was watching, he wanted to fix it. She ended the call quietly. Later, Mame Surwa showed up at the gate, shouting that Amma was destroying the family name. Neighbors watched. Some filmed. No one opened the gate. Amma Didi sat by the window, her burned hand resting on her. She looked out at the sky, not crying, not smiling, just breathing. The noise outside kept growing, but inside her was something calm, something rising. For the first time in a long time, she felt the hum of justice in her chest. And it sounded like power. Ya didn't want to go. His feet felt heavy, like they were glued to the ground. But Amma Didi held his hand tightly, her eyes determined. We have to do this, she said softly. They walked together to the police station, her head high, his heart pounding. The building felt cold and tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. Inside, Mame Surwa was already there. Her arms were crossed, her lips pressed in a tight line. As soon as she saw Amma Didi, she pointed a shaking finger at her. You're bringing shame to this family, she hissed. You should have kept quiet. Amma Didi didn't flinch. Her voice was calm but firm. The shame is not mine. They were led into a small office where the commissioner sat behind a desk. Ya hesitated as Amma Didi pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed play. The video began to play, the proof, the truth, the pain that had been locked in silence for too long. Everyone in the room went quiet. Even Mame Surwa looked shaken. The commissioner watched every second. His expression hardened. When the video ended, he didn't ask any questions. He simply picked up the phone and gave a sharp order. Arrest him. Now. Amma Didi blinked, stunned. Ya looked at her with wide eyes. Something inside her shifted. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, breathing. For the first time in so long, she felt seen. She felt heard. She felt strong. Mame Surwa started shouting again, calling it a mistake, a misunderstanding. But her voice no longer mattered. The truth had spoken, and this time, it was louder than shame. Outside the station, the sun was already beginning to set. But to Amma Didi, it felt like a sunrise. She looked at Ya, and he looked back, eyes full of guilt and quiet understanding. They had a long road ahead. But something had changed. She had taken the first step. She had faced the storm. And now, even with fear in her chest, Amma Didi walked a little taller. The courtroom was cold and quiet, filled with the heavy breath of justice waiting to be served. Amma Didi sat at the front, wearing a simple white dress. It flowed gently around her ankles, soft, clean, strong. She had never worn white on her wedding day. Mame Surwa had said it wasn't necessary. But today, Amma chose it for herself. Not as a bride, but as a woman reclaiming her voice. People whispered in the gallery. Some knew her from school, others had seen the video online. They watched her, not with pity, but with respect. Mame Surwa sat across the room, her usual pride replaced with silence. Her lawyer whispered to her, but her eyes never met Amma's. When it was time for Amma Didi to speak, she stood slowly. Her heart beat hard in her chest, but her voice was steady. She didn't just burn my hand, Amma began. She tried to burn my spirit. She wanted to silence me, make me feel small, invisible. She poured that oil on me to send a message, that I didn't belong. She paused, holding back tears. Then she looked at the judge and continued. But the doctor saw what I couldn't say. He told me it wasn't an accident. And from that moment, I knew I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I was hurt, and I deserved to be heard. The judge listened closely. Everyone did. She tried to erase me, Amma said quietly. But the truth saved me. When she sat down, the room stayed still for a few moments. Then the judge spoke. His voice was clear, firm. This court finds Mame Surwa guilty of physical assault, emotional abuse, and endangerment. A protective order will be placed immediately. You are not above the law. Mame Surwa was taken away without a word. Amma Didi sat in her seat, breathing slowly. The white dress felt lighter now. Her body still carried scars, but her spirit stood tall. She hadn't just won a case. She had claimed her name, her truth, her place in the world. Justice had finally arrived, and she wore it like a crown. Amma Didi could still feel the scar on her hand every morning when she woke up. It had faded a little, but it was still there, a dark, twisted reminder of pain. But now, when she looked at it, she didn't feel shame. She felt power. That scar had once made her cry in silence. Now, it gave her strength to speak out loud. Months after the court case, Amma Didi did something bold. She opened a small support center in Accra for women who had survived domestic abuse. It started with just 2 rooms above a bookshop, one for counseling, the other for legal advice. There were no fancy chairs, no big banners, just a warm space, a listening ear, and the promise that no woman would face her pain alone again. She called it Nkiankiam Hope House, meaning journey in Twi. Because healing, she had learned, was not a straight line. It was messy, hard, but possible, with support. Women came, some with bruises, some with broken voices. Many just needed someone to tell them, I believe you. Amma told them, again and again, and they began to believe it too. Soon, people began to notice her work. Journalists came to interview her. Churches and schools invited her to speak. And then, one day, an invitation arrived that made her pause. Accra Women's Summit, keynote speaker. On the day of the summit, she stood backstage, heart racing. She wore a bright African print dress and no gloves, her scarred hand visible to everyone. When it was her turn, she walked slowly to the microphone. The lights were hot. The room was full. She lifted her hand. "This," she said, holding it high, "was meant to silence me. But now, it gives me the voice to stand here. I was not just burned, I was tested. And I came out as fire." The room erupted in applause. Some women cried. Others stood up. Her story had become more than pain. It had become power. Amadidi smiled through her tears. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a leader, a light, a voice for the voiceless. The hall was filled with light, music, and quiet excitement. Leaders, activists, students, and survivors gathered to celebrate women who had made a difference. Amadidi sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating fast. She still couldn't believe it. She was about to receive a national award for courage. The Minister of Women's Affairs stepped up to the stage and spoke into the microphone. "Tonight, we honor a woman whose strength lit a fire across this country. A woman who turned pain into purpose. A woman who refused to be silenced. Please welcome Amadidi." The room burst into applause as Amma rose from her seat. She walked slowly to the stage, every step steady. Her scarred hand, once hidden in shame, was uncovered. She held it proudly, no glove, no shame. She took the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, and took a deep breath. "They thought they burned me," she said, her voice calm and clear. "So I became the flame." The audience was silent for a second, and then it rose to its feet. Cheers. Claps. Tears. It was more than applause. It was respect. It was love. It was change. In the crowd, Mame Surwa sat quietly in the back. Her face was pale, her hands in her lap. She said nothing. For the first time, she had no words. Amadidi stood tall on the stage, award in hand, heart wide open. She had walked through fire, and now, she was lighting the way for others. A mother's courage had not just saved her own life. It had changed a nation.